Knapen from Max Planck Institute for the Science of Human History in Germany. Martijn Knapen is a doctoral researcher in linguistics, affiliated with the Archaeolinguistic Research Group at the Max Planck Institute for the Science of Human History. His research focuses on the development of the Amuric languages, the languages of the Nivkh people, and their prehistoric intersection with the Tungusic languages. And Martijn, are you there?
Yep, I am.
Okay, hello, hi. So the title of his presentation is Nivkh toponyms and anthroponyms recorded during the following Qing surveys of Sakhalin Island. The floor is yours.
Okay, yeah, thank you for the introduction, and good morning and good evening to everyone. So I'll be talking today about Nivkh toponyms and anthroponyms recorded during and following Qing surveys of Sakhalin Island. So I'll first give some geographical and historical context, after which I'll go over some previous research in Nivkh onomastics and Qing mapping of Sakhalin, after which I'll go over the methodology that I've used, just basic things like linguistic reconstruction, and how I have interpreted the transcriptions in the sources that I've used. Then I'll go over some preliminary findings of historical and linguistic relevance. This study is still ongoing. There's a lot of data to go through, but I'll give some general ideas of what my findings are. And then I'll wrap up with some concluding remarks. So let's first set the scene. This map shows you all the different ethno-linguistic groups of the Lower Amur and Sakhalin. It reflects the second half of the 19th century, when the original map on which this one is based was made. And it's important to note here that most of these languages that we see pictured did not have their own written literary tradition until the 1930s. Now, Sakhalin Island is the island here. This island is north of the island of Hokkaido, which is the most northern island of Japan, which gives a further point of reference. Then the two languages that are important to this story are Nivkh, or also called Amuric. This depends on whether Nivkh is regarded as a group of dialects or a larger language family, and then the label Amuric is used. And south of it, we find the Manchu language. This language is kind of special in this region in the sense that it did develop its own writing system before the 1930s and also produced several documents. Now, an important character in this story is the Russo-Chinese border. And I've attempted to draw this on the map that I'm showing here in red. And this is the current location. So to the north, we have Russia, and to the south, we have China. Now, in this border did not always used to be in this location. It used to be further to the northwest, as is shown on this map. And this has everything to do with the development of Russo-Chinese relations during the 17th century. So in 1636, the Manchu-led Qing dynasty was founded. This is the last dynasty of China. And of course, the Manchu people are the people that spoke the Manchu language, of which there are very few speakers left nowadays. Now, when the Russians expanded to the east in the 17th century, they, of course, came into contact with China, which resulted in several conflicts with relation to the border. And these conflicts were later resolved in 1689 through the Treaty of Nerchinsk, which established where this border should be. In the following year, to explore the areas that they had just claimed, the Qing sent 6 survey parties down the Amur to verify where this border was. And I just noticed a typo, but the important party in this story is the survey party headed by Lieutenant General Balda, and he arrived on Sakhalin and was the first to explore this island, at least from the Manchu side. Now, in 1711, Duty Group Commander Sarcan was sent with a party to chart Sakhalin, and this is related to a great effort from Qing court to survey the island. And these findings then were included in the overview maps of imperial territories, which were published in 1718. And this is pictured here. So this, what we see here is supposed to be Sakhalin on the 1721 edition of these maps. So what kind of data has this resulted in? Of course, there are toponyms, which we find on the maps that were produced. But we also have clan names and personal names, and this has everything to do with the fact that these people, Sarcan and Balda, were not just sent to this area to map it, but also to subjugate the local population and reorganize them into the tribute-paying system. So we have records of tribute payments, which also lists the personal names of the individuals that paid it and the clans to which they belonged. So this gives us quite a lot of data to work with. Now, Nivkh onomastics has mostly been approached from a synchronic perspective, and what is important for what I'm looking at is some of these analyses that have been done. So for Nivkh toponyms, it has been established that Nivkh place names are usually single words or compounds referencing features of the local environment. And for Nivkh personal names and also clan names, they are generally derived from other words in the Nivkh language using specialized morphology. For clan names, it's also often that they are connected to a particular place that is constructed in the way that I have mentioned a little bit before this. So for mapping Sakhalin, the most important author is Matsura, and I have also cite him throughout this presentation, and he successfully identified numerous names of Nivkh individuals and their settlements in these Manchu sources and maps. Now for the methodology, my main interest in this data is from a historical linguistic perspective, to see what kind of interesting details we can get for the development of the Nivkh language, as well as some historical facts. And so I've quoted here from this chapter written by Coates called Names and Historical Linguistics, and his remark that names are linguistic objects. They are just like the counterparts in the language's ordinary vocabulary and grammar. They can therefore be explained etymologically to the same extent as their counterparts, is quite important because we can then apply also standard linguistic methodology to them. He also notes the importance of understanding the phonological history in this study of these names, at least from the historical linguistic perspective. And that is the part that I'll go over now. So for linguistic reconstruction, the standard method is the comparative method. I assume this is, it is the standard method. And this is done through systematic comparison of words of two related languages, which I've shown here as also an example of. So if we want to reconstruct the ancestor language or the previous form of Nivkh, then we can use the extant varieties, compare them. And if we want to reconstruct the word for frog, we get rang, which is quite similar to what we also find in the extant varieties, as I've listed here, where we also find rang. And this is not particularly typical of what we would expect for a language family that's split up in the distant past. So this also suggests that it's quite shallow. And this is kind of a problem that results from the fact that these language or languages were only written down quite recently. To get further into the past, we can use other methods like internal reconstruction, which reconstructs protoforms by relying on data internal to one language. And quite a famous example in the context of Nivkh is this prefix e. So if this prefix is added to a verb like klu, which means to be afraid of something, the first consonant changes to h, so it becomes iglu. This we can also observe in other verbs, but we don't see the prefix. So we have the verb tuch, meaning to choose, which becomes ruch in exactly the same context as where we would find iglu, but we don't see the prefix. Now, since we see the consonant change, we can then infer that there must have been a prefix originally that was deleted. And that is how we get to the reconstruction iduch. Now, since we also saw that our word for frog started with r, we might reconstruct then that it also goes back to this consonant, which was preceded by a vowel, and after that, the vowel dropped out. So something like vowel dan. And this can also be verified on the basis of loanwords, like this word was actually borrowed into Wilta, which is another language spoken on Sakhalin. And here we see still this initial vowel and also this consonant through which the r goes back. Now, the procedure that I've used for analyzing the transcriptions, it all takes perception into account. So when a foreign language is perceived, what generally happens when a foreign language is perceived by a non-native speaker, then generally this native speaker will hear foreign sounds like native sounds. And as a result, this might also be then reflected in our transcriptions, which are based on whatever the listener thought they heard. So the transcriptions might not be a perfect copy of the original word. Now, if the phonologies are quite similar of these two languages, then there might not be so much of a change, but if they are much more different, then of course the result will also be greater, or the difference will also be greater in a result. What first needs to be asked is what was written down. So given the age of the material, the transcriptions likely reflect an older form of the language. And what this may have looked like, we can reconstruct through the methods that I have just described. That is just so that we don't really compare apples to oranges. The next question is, of course, who wrote it down, which is important because we need to take the perception into account of this person. And so the data has been transcribed by individuals who most likely spoke Manchu as the first language. It's people like Sarcan and Balda and the other members of the survey party. And these people most likely did not speak Nivkh. So I have a brief case study, which also presents some of the results that I have. So the Nivkh name of Alexander of Sakhalinsky, which is a city on the west coast of Sakhalin, is Rui. And this is derived from the verb Rui Rui, meaning to pour sand on the ground. As I did with my word for frog, I reconstruct here a vowel in the beginning, but I'm a bit more agnostic about the consonant. So then let's see what kind of data we have. Now, on the overview maps of imperial territories, we find a village called Iduigashan. And this is located south of a village called Tukken. And this corresponds in name to the Gulf of Tuk, which is also a new name derived from the word for basket. And this gulf is north of Alexander of Sakhalinsky. So this is a way of verifying that this village is Alexander of Sakhalinsky, or our modern day Alexander of Sakhalinsky. So Iduigashan reflects this vowel brief form, but we have to ask, did the Manchu transcriber hear it correctly? Most likely he did. So Manchu differentiates de from r, and therefore most likely he did not, if r was originally spoken by the informant, then most likely he would not have perceived it as de and would not have written it as de. The same is also true for this initial vowel, since we can establish now that this word had a de. De is allowed as an initial consonant in Manchu, and therefore it would not have been necessary to add this E. So Iduigashan goes back to Rui. Iduigashan shows that Rui goes back to Idui, and additionally we can then also reconstruct this word from which it derives as Idui. And then I'll briefly go over the preliminary findings. So if we have Matsura's previous work, and he generally associates Manchu transcriptions of particular names with similar sounding later transcriptions of place names. The methodological problem of that is that these transcriptions were written down in different periods in history, and in the meantime, the language might have changed. So he's not exactly comparing to the exact same stages of the language. And for that reason, some of Matsura's findings might need to be reassessed, and an example of which would be his localization of the clan called Node. So according to Matsura, it is located on the northwest coast at the place where the village Neide was, which does have a somewhat similar sounding name. And here it is pictured on a different map. I should note that this shows you the north of Sakhalin, but the map is a bit slanted to the left. Now, the Node clan is mentioned in the archives of the Office of the Lieutenant General of Ningguta as one of these tribute payers. And so let's assess whether Matsura was correct. Manchu Node would suggest, well, that it is underlyingly Node, as I pronounce it here. And if we then take into account all the different sound changes that have happened in Nivkh, then we can hypothesize, or well, we can create the present form Noer or Nover. This is what it should have become, and this is not particularly similar to Neide. So for that reason, this identification is most likely not correct. And then there might also be alternatives, and the one I would propose is that we should compare it to a village called Nover or Novervo, which is derived from the word for four. And this used to be located on the Schmidt Peninsula, but the exact location is unknown. So according to Matsura, Node should be here, as I've shown, at Neide village. But on the basis of this analysis, I would place Node on the Schmidt Peninsula around this area that I show here. Now, I've tried to verify all these different identifications made by Matsura, and generally he is correct that if we look at the overview maps of imperial territories, that on this map, no place names are mentioned that are located above the 53rd parallel, which covers most of the north of the island. So then it's rather interesting that we find these names like Node as well as others that I could not discuss here. And such names would suggest that the Qing officials also visited the north of Sakhalin above the 53rd parallel, and that they might have had some interactions with the local population. What I'm also looking at is ways of improving the reconstructions, and for that, we can also use this onomastic data. Through internal reconstruction, it has so far been established that a lot of vowels were lost in later Nivkh, but it is unclear what these vowels are, and sometimes even where they should be placed in the word. There might be many options possible. And one of these, an example of this would be if we try to reconstruct what the name Tolvin might go back to. So this is derived from the word Tolv, meaning summer, and it is a male name. If we reconstruct this, we get all these different options that I have listed here. Well, among the tribute payers in the archives of the Office of the Lieutenant General of Ningguta, there is one Nivkh chief mentioned of the name Turbianu. Both of these spellings are listed. And based on that, it seems that the best reconstruction would be Durbianu, with the vowel after the y and a final vowel after the n. So this narrows down all the different options that we have. So then I'll move on to my concluding remarks. Well, so far, most of the place names on Sakhalin could be identified successfully, as well as several clans and a few personal names. It might be that some of these names will never be properly identified just due to the fact that there's certain limits to the later data that we have available. And a detailed study should reveal the extent of the Qing sphere of influence on the Nivkh half of Sakhalin. So as I showed in my previous example, it might have extended further to the north than would seem to be the case on the basis of the maps that have been passed down to us. Now, further analysis might also fill in other gaps in the historical phonology of Nivkh/Amur, and that is something I am still working on. But what I have hoped to have established through this presentation is that that this onomastic data that we have here is of great importance to the study of Nivkh, but also in more general terms, it is important for the reconstructing the history of smaller languages and the people that speak them, in case there is no ancient tradition of writing. And a little bit under time, I'll wrap up this presentation. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. That was a very informative presentation. Thank you for the details that you provided. That was very, very interesting. Thanks. How long have you been studying this language?
I think I'm coming up to my second or third year working on this. Mm-hmm. And for the study on the names, I think I started last year somewhere in the beginning.
Because it must be, yeah. We have a question from Dorothy Robbins. Nivkh is an endangered language. How can historical linguistics, including reconstruction, assist in preservation in keeping the language alive?
Yeah, that's quite a difficult question. Well, so definitely, if we talk about descriptive linguistics, there's a direct connection with the community and the people that are working on this side of, Nivkh studies, let's say. They have made great contributions also to this. So there are some of these programs that have been set up that would help preserve this language. With respect to historical linguistics, it might be more of a question of kind of reclaiming part of the history that seems to have been lost, since as far as I'm aware, even within the Nivkh community, not everyone's, there are not that many, well, at least the people who actually interacted with all these explorers that went to Sakhalin have since passed away. But there's still there used to be some memories in the community that there was these kind of interactions. And it is mainly that what historical linguistics can help with is clarifying this history and might add in giving create more of an image of pride among the community. At least what you often see in the community is that people like to share articles that say that the Nivkh are the most ancient people in this particular area. So I hope that is somewhat satisfactory.
That's from Anne Anderson, sorry. Your discussion of the R versus D seemed to focus on sound when languages are transcribed. Is it on the basis of how sounds are heard or of how they are produced by the tongue, palate, breath, etc.? Yeah,
in this answer, I would not so much focus on how this happens specifically in the context of transcription, but more so looking at perception in general. And for modeling perception, there are different theories, and some of these theories, they focus on how the sounds are produced. But perhaps if I understand it correctly, yeah, a problem also with perception research is that, at least from my understanding, I am not an expert on this, but there's often not a great, usually there are different models for how this perception works, how sounds are equated to different other sounds within the phonology, within the native phonology, but not so much what then happens when they are produced, and whether that has any influence on it. There seems to be little research on that so far. So there might be an effect on that, but that is simply, there's simply no research I can rely on. At least in terms of perception, it is quite clear that there is in the beginning, there is no proper perception of these sounds when there's little familiarity with the language in question. So this is the only thing that we can take into account when analyzing these transcriptions.
There is another question from Alexa Prince. Well, no, that's not actually a question. No more questions for me, but thank you very much for this informative talk. This is something new for me. Also, thanks to Mirko for reading the questions and comments so clearly. My pleasure. So that was not actually a question. Well, I was actually wondering, because you based this study on the Qing surveys, right? Mm-hmm. Are there other sources or documents that can be like included or that can be useful, or I don't know?
Yeah, absolutely, there are. But that's more so that I didn't include this data because it would be too much.
No, maybe for the for the study.
Yeah, no, but I'm actually working on this. So, so it's not just that the Qing were interested in this area, kind of to get an idea of what the area looked like that they claimed. Also, because well, Japan is to the south, and to the Japanese, there was also this perception that Sakhalin belonged to them. So there are also explorers that went to Sakhalin to chart the territory. And this has also resulted in several maps. And yeah, I can't really say if there are any personal names in, well, there's some personal names in there, but it's difficult to establish whether they are really Nivkh or perhaps another language. So there's definitely this other data that it can be compared to. And some of these developments that I talked about, you can kind of track them on the basis of these maps. So I guess from the 17th century to the 19th century, we have a couple of maps and we can see how the language changes based on that. And not just from Japan, but then later also we have Russian maps and so forth.
Thank you. That's interesting. I was also wondering, are there like areas where two languages coexist, sort of bilingual areas between communities that maybe, I don't know, where names are into dual names or something like that?
Yeah, there was a village more to, so yeah, on the map that I showed, the Nivkh area is more in the north of the island, and below it there was a different color, and that represents Ainu. So there is this one village that had two different names. In Nivkh it was called Pilvo, and in Ainu it was called Porokotan. Mm-hmm. And this basically just means big village. In both languages, the meaning is the same. And in this big village, there were people who were reportedly bilingual in both Nivkh and Ainu. Or even that they were, I hope I remember this correctly, but in more recent research, it has been concluded that it seems like these people were originally Ainu and then shifted to Nivkh. And yeah, there is a bit hard to say how bilingual the people were, but there was definitely contact between them. And they're quite likely they're also bilingual families in the sense that in this tribute paying system, one of the things that they would get in exchange for paying tribute was a wife, and these were often Manchu in ethnicity. So probably there were also bilingual families at some point, but well, yeah, it is a bit difficult to really be completely certain about this, just due to the fact that we have no records from the community themselves until the 1930s.
Mm. Thank you. That was very interesting, very informative. So thank you very much. Martijn, right?
Yeah.
Am I pronouncing that correctly? I wasn't 100% sure. So thank you very much for your presentation.